Okay, hello there everybody. Hi there Waltoneers, I'm Jack and this is DSNY Newscast, a breaking news DSNY Newscast right now. Hopefully the audio works and everything's fine. I've had to jump on here very quickly because of this huge breaking news that we've just received. So I thought, let's just discuss this as soon as possible. But the first thing to say is ding dong, isn't it? Ding dong, the witch is dead. Chapek has gone. Bob Chapek is now no longer the CEO of the Walt Disney Company, effective immediately. I've got to laugh because I released a video only like 5 hours ago that was basically, it was about the Disney brand and the executive decision making of Bob Chapek and how he was kind of ruining the Disney brand. And that video has now aged like milk. So, yeah, not great from that standpoint, but fantastic news all around. And it's even bigger than that because not only has Chapek now left Disney as Disney CEO, which we're going to discuss in greater depth in a minute, but Bob Iger has now returned as Disney CEO, which is another monumental piece of not just Hollywood or entertainment or theme park, but business news. It's huge in terms of that. And yeah, I can see Sydney says here, is this an April Fool's? No, it's November. Definitely not an April Fool's. This is huge. So yeah, let's break this all down. I've got the press release here ready to go. So just bear with me because I'm having to look at the screen at the same time. So I'm not looking at the camera, I'm looking over here. But here's the press release. So Robert A. Iger, Bob Iger is back as Chief Executive Officer. The Walt Disney Company announced today that Robert Iger is returning to lead Disney as Disney's Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately. Iger, who spent more than 4 decades at the company, including 15 years as the CEO, and he left obviously in 2020, stepped down as CEO in 2020 and left the company at the end of 2021, has agreed to serve as Disney CEO for another 2 years, with a mandate from the board to set the strategic direction for the renewed growth and to work closely with the board in developing a successor to lead the company. At the completion of his term, Mr. Iger succeeds Bob Chapek, who has now stepped down from his position. We thank Bob Chapek for his service. Okay, we thank Bob Chapek for his service to Disney over his long career, including navigating the company through the unprecedented challenges of the pandemic, says Susan Arnold, who is the chairman of the board of directors. The board has concluded that as Disney embarks on an increasingly complex period of industry transformation, Bob Iger is uniquely situated to lead the company through this pivotal period. Mr. Iger has the deep respect of Disney's, let me just zoom out there, zoom back in again, let me just double check, there we go. Yeah, I've just lost my place. Right. Bob Iger is uniquely situated to lead the company through this pivotal period. Mr. Iger has the deep respect of Disney's senior leadership team, most of whom he has worked closely with until his departure as executive chairman 11 months ago. Like I said, at the end of 2021, that was his final day. And he is greatly admired by Disney employees worldwide, all of which will allow him for a seamless transition of leadership. The position of chairman of board remains unchanged, with Susan Arnold serving in this capacity. Mr. Iger says, I am extremely optimistic for the future of this great company and thrilled to be asked by the board to return as CEO. Iger said, Disney and its incomparable brands and franchises hold a special place in the hearts of so many around the world, most especially in the hearts of our employees, whose dedication to the company and its mission is an inspiration. I am deeply honored to be asked yet again to lead this remarkable team, with a clear mission focused on creative excellence to inspire generations through unrivaled, bold storytelling. During his 15 years as CEO, from 2005 to 2020, Mr. Iger built Disney into one of the world's most... Sorry about this, wait, let me just drag this part off the screen. There you go. Built Disney into one of the world's most successful and admired media and entertainment companies with a strategic vision focused on creative excellence, technological innovation, and international growth. He expanded on Disney's legacy of unparalleled storytelling with the acquisitions of Pixar, Marvel, Lucasfilm, and 21st Century Fox, and increased the company's market capitalization fivefold. Okay, so there we go. That was the press release, hot off the presses, as they say in the news world, from the Walt Disney Company. Now, I'm going to get to your comments. I can see them all; they're all coming in very, very quickly here. But yeah, let me just give my immediate reaction to this. Let me just also have a look at the best news of 2022. I'm seeing. The spice must follow. I know what you mean by that. Yeah, there's going to be a story behind this, which I'm guessing one of the major Hollywood, tabloids will have in the next week or so. So we'll see how that goes. Let me put that back up there. There we go. So this is my thoughts on it. It's fantastic news. I know Bob Iger, of recent years, people have questioned how he left. I certainly have in different live streams before. I think at the end of the day, this is an extremely positive move forward for the Walt Disney Company. To actually begin that succession process and actually have a safe pair of hands guide the company through what's going to be a very difficult period over the next year or two. And then actually have a proper succession campaign, not even a campaign, but, finding a new CEO, basically, a succession search, and finding the right candidate for that role for then the next 5 or 10 years to lead Disney into the 2030s. This is fantastic news. Can't understate that enough. Can't underline that enough here. The other reason why I think this is a very positive move is because Bob Iger is the one who basically saw where the market was moving with Netflix and the streaming model, and he basically is the one who decided, no, we're going to have to launch Disney Plus. And say what you want about Disney Plus, but that was a fantastic move on Disney's part leading into the pandemic. Obviously, no one knew a pandemic was going to arrive in 2020, but it basically gave Disney a fantastic revenue generator during that very difficult period of time when the parks were closed and no money was coming in, so they could rely on the Disney Plus and the subscriber growth. But over the last 2 years, I don't really think Chapek at all has had a vision whatsoever. I said this in my video, which was just all about the Disney brand and Chapek's influence on it. I don't think he's had any vision whatsoever for where he really wanted to take the company. He went on about metaverse, and as soon as Facebook rebranded to Meta, he was all about, we'll talk about the metaverse, we'll do that. And then he released it in his big, for the next 100 years of a company, and here's my mission statement for where I would like to take the company. He said the metaverse was a key part of it, and then lo and behold, 10 months later, he's like, we won't call it the metaverse now, we're going to call it next gen storytelling. It was just this kind of like, it was just flailing around trying to find a direction instead of having a very concise direction already in front of them, which they already had with Disney Plus. And I hadn't seen, although they've been investing in Disney Plus. By the way, thank you for the super chats that are coming in. I'll read a couple of these now so we get the comments on the screen. Let me just resize it though. Give me a second. Okay. Super chat says from Caleb. Thank you for that, Caleb. I just hope that he doesn't backtrack on eventually merging Hulu with Disney Plus. He's stated in the past that he's not partial to non-family friendly content in Disney Plus. What's your take on that? So this comes back to the video I was talking about only a couple of hours ago, which I don't even know if I'll leave up on YouTube now because, I joked on Twitter that, I post a video about how Chapek shouldn't be Disney CEO, and lo and behold, a couple of hours later, he's gone. But, at the end of the day, when it comes to this kind of brand separation of what is the Disney brand and where should it be, and Chapek used to talk about the elasticity of a brand and how you could slap it on everything basically and it would travel, as he'd like to say, the elasticity of it. I actually don't think Disney's brand name should be used on everything, and I thought at the time maybe Disney Plus as a name wasn't the strongest name because obviously it limits you from being able to do more adult family instead of family friendly content, more adult focused content in terms of things from Hulu and things like that, like Handmaid's Tale and stuff like that being played on there. So it limited them from that standpoint. So I know they won't, but I would rebrand Disney Plus to something else so I could incorporate everything in the US and Canada market into that one thing. But then again, if they take over Hulu, then maybe I'll just couple everything together. Okay, so yeah, the timing is hilarious. The timing of this video is definitely hilarious. I see you there by Tony. Yeah. But yeah, so leave the video up. I'm seeing. Yeah, the comments are coming in so fast. Okay, so here's the other thing, which is it's a 2-year succession now. So we're going to see a 2-year period where Iger's going to get Disney back on the right foot. And in my opinion, that is investment back into the parks, because D23 Expo this year was lackluster. Universal's opening Epic Universe just down the road, and that's going to be a massive contender for guest interest, and people only have a certain amount of vacation days to take at each year at one time, and so they're going to have to pick. And so I don't know if it's fast enough for them to be able to get something into the parks to compete with that, but it will be re-injecting some of that momentum behind the Disney Parks division as well. Disney Parks had a record year. They made $28.7 billion in 1 year alone, this year alone. So, the parks are a fantastic, revenue source, and they should be treated as such. The other thing I would say is that, whoever they pick next, I know a lot of people, I'd like to hear what your suggestions are in the comments here, but the person who I would have picked, who isn't actually with the company anymore, and I said this back in, when was it? March of 2020, when Chapek announced that, when Chapek was announced to be the next CEO. I actually released a video around a week later, and I said, I kind of expected Chapek to be the CEO, because that's what I was hearing and where the momentum was going and stuff like that in terms of who the next person in line was going to be. But the person I wanted was Kevin Mayer. And maybe a name that you don't really know, but Kevin Mayer is the guy who was basically Bob Iger's right-hand man in setting up Disney Plus, and he oversaw the acquisition of BAMTech, which is the major, streaming powerhouse that powers Disney Plus and keeps it consistent and reliable with, normal uptime. I'm seeing other suggestions here. Peter Rice was another one. Peter Rice was a British person who basically worked his way up through Disney, and he came in via the 21st Century Fox acquisition. And I actually put this out on Twitter earlier this year, saying that I thought Peter Rice would be a fairly good person to have take over from Chapek, because he had all of the Hollywood connections. He was well liked within Hollywood, which is a very critical part of the whole CEO role. And I thought he'd be a great CEO of the company. Because despite it being a theme park business, a cruise line business, consumer products, animation, Pixar, Marvel, Lucasfilm, 21st Century Fox, at the end of the day, it's all about the business of entertainment. And if you know the entertainment business well, then that's going to stand you in good stead. And, in summer of 2021, the alarm bells should have started flashing for the board of directors when they saw how Bob Chapek mishandled the whole Scarlett Johansson issue. That should have been dealt with completely behind closed doors, reached a settlement on the contract on the back end of the Black Widow release, and just not upset Hollywood. But instead, that whole public discourse about, the way that he released a statement saying, oh, well, you've made this amount of money, Scarlett Johansson, so why should you be entitled to back end? That was such an ugly dispute to be seen within Hollywood, and that really did him a lot of harm in terms of, Hollywood heavyweights basically looking at him going, you're not handling yourself very well. So, that was alarm bells flashing. We saw how lackluster the 50th anniversary of Walt Disney World was. No nostalgia whatsoever anywhere around the resort. And only just this summer in August did they decide to put a tag at the beginning of Enchantment, which should have been there from the very beginning. Because although, yes, I understand you've got to celebrate the whole of the company, at the end of the day, when it's an anniversary, you've got to have the nostalgia of the anniversary and remember where it all started. And I'm actually very glad that we're seeing Iger take over Disney 100, because but next year is going to be the 100th anniversary of Walt Disney Company, and they need some nostalgia. Very few companies manage to make it to 100 years of operation, and that's a monumental milestone that should not be overlooked. And the very fact that Disney's got to this huge milestone should be celebrated, but not just celebrate the here and now of the modern day IP. It should be celebrating the illustrious history of the company. That's animation, live action, all the acquisitions as well. I'd celebrate with those as well, and the history of those companies. But I would also celebrate right at the very beginning, where it started. You know, Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, things like that. Before, I know that's before, well, it was around the same sort of time, but what I'm saying is, when it comes to Disney 100 next year, Disney need to lean into that nostalgia. And that's one way that they'll help rebuild their brand reputation. This comes back to my video I was talking about. If they can play into that thing and they say, look, here's a nostalgic old Disney that you know and you loved, and we've listened most of all, and we're back. We're going to be going back in that direction of giving you the family-friendly entertainment, you know, the wholesome, family-friendly brand that Disney always stood for originally, and we're going to be bringing that back to the core of the Disney 100 celebration and celebrating the entertainment history of the Walt Disney Company. And I feel like that would be a massive step in the right direction. And just this news alone will be breathing new life into the Disney brand, and give a lot more people confidence to return to Disney in the next couple of years. It'd be interesting to see what happens with Genie Plus and things like that, because that was a decision that was made by Chapek, basically. But yeah, I want to get to some of these comments. There's so many of them. God, there's so many comments here. Our Disney World Fix says, I wonder, since Chapek is gone, if the Florida government seek to cancel the dissolution of RCID. I don't know about that, because I think that this decision, it's too early to say whether Iger's reinstatement as CEO will affect that. It's too early to say about that, because the one thing I will say about Iger, and the one thing I will say about Chapek that he wasn't, Chapek was a good CEO, but not of Disney. He would have been a great CEO of a big box retailer like Target or Walmart or Best Buy or something like that, and he'll have the opportunity to go lead a company like that now and focus on the profits and losses and try and balance those out, and focus on footfall and like he talks about yield management and things like that. And that's the arena where he functions best. If Chapek would have been the CFO of Disney, I don't think we would be talking negatively about Chapek. If he was the chief operating officer of Disney, I don't think we'd be talking negatively about Chapek. But CEO of the Walt Disney Company requires you to be a statesman. It's a global brand that needs to be managed almost like a small country. And so you need to maintain relationships, whether it be with the Florida government, Hollywood insiders and the Hollywood press, Hollywood actors, Hollywood, you know, in terms of the actual professionals and creatives that run Hollywood. It's a very fine balancing act that you've got to walk very, very carefully, basically. And you've got to be able to make relationships, bridge those connections, and be a statesman. And I don't feel like that's what Chapek was. And I think actually when we look back on his tenure, which I'll probably do a deeper dive video into, that was his main downfall, was the fact that he wasn't a statesman CEO. And one thing that I will definitely say about Iger is he knows how to be a statesman CEO. He knows how to represent the brand, be media savvy with what he says, careful about what he says, and you know, he embodies that company. And him back as CEO for 2 years now. So we've got Iger until the end of 2024. And, you know, probably, I don't know the exact date yet, but it could be up until the end of 2024. And probably 1st of Jan will probably be when the next CEO starts. And I feel like this, especially if the succession plan of the whole finding the next CEO is a more transparent process with the shareholders, with the stakeholders, because even if you don't own Disney stock, you're a stakeholder in the company in terms of being invested in the company and being interested in the company. I feel like that will be a great thing for Disney if they're transparent about process. Whether they're not, it doesn't, you know, if they're not, then, you know, they can do it their own way. But I also would like to see Disney not just look internally for a CEO position now. I would like them to look externally, because I feel like Disney, for the next 10 years, they need to find the right person, bring them in, either coach them for a year, maybe, on the business and how complex the Disney company is, and then from there let them fly, and bring their external factors in and be able to spread their wings. And I feel like Chapek, obviously there's something that's gone down tonight. We know that this past week, let's just talk about a little bit about the history of what's just gone on this past week. So earlier this week, Jim Cramer of CNBC, he came out very, very negatively against Chapek, and he basically said he shouldn't be CEO anymore. And say what you want about Jim Cramer, he's been right and wrong in the past, but on that issue, I totally agree with him. And he said that the way he handled the quarterly earnings call, making it seem like it was a stellar quarter when in actual fact, there was huge losses and, Disney's kind of floundering for direction. That basically set a whole snowball movement going. And I feel like not just me, I've watched many interviews with Chapek, and I really felt for a long time now that he wasn't right for the role. I mean, I wouldn't have picked him in the first place, to be honest. And you can go back to that video, which I did back in March of 2020. And in that video, I actually did say I'd prefer Kevin Mayer as Disney CEO. So I was never a Chapek fan. I was willing to give him, he was the CEO, so I was willing to give him a chance. But over the course of his tenure, I think he's messed it up. And if Chapek had just been the pandemic CEO and stepped down at the end of the pandemic and gone, I not only saved the company, I ensured that it survived throughout the pandemic. I made the difficult decisions that I had to do to ensure Disney's long-term survival, but the CEO role of a Walt Disney Company isn't something which I feel like I'm best suited to, and he just stepped down. History would look back very kindly on his tenure, but instead he wasn't the right person for the role, and that was continuously present in every decision that was made, and all of the media and everything like that. It was just so obvious. But yeah, no. So let's get to more of these comments. So long. I just saw a comment coming in so fast. So long, Star Cruiser. Star Cruiser's not going anywhere, I don't think. I think we will see updates to Star Cruiser now because of that. The new 100 years are kind of a letdown for me. Someone saying Chapek was the best CEO. There must be some sarcasm there. Bring back Eisner. Yeah, Eisner. He's another CEO, but here's where Eisner worked so well, is that Eisner was very much a creative CEO, but he didn't enjoy the business side of things. And where Eisner fell down was after the tragic death of Frank Wells in 1994 in the helicopter crash, because Frank Wells handled the business side of things, and Eisner went off and handled the creative side of things, and pushed Disney in a certain direction. And those yin and yang kind of movement, the balance there, worked perfectly. But once Frank Wells wasn't in the picture, it basically meant that Eisner had to take on everything, and trying to be the overseer of everything, creative and business, it was too much, and things started to be overlooked. Basically, that's where Eisner went down. That was his downside. But Iger's been very good in the past at knowing to lead by example, but not trying to micromanage every single little decision. And he gave immense power to Kevin Feige over at Marvel. He gave immense power to Kathleen Kennedy at Star Wars, and he gave immense power to Pete Docter at Pixar. And by doing that, he allowed the people that knew those brands and those companies and those studios best to run those studios. But the way that Chapek changed it is he basically said in 2020, end of 2020, we're going to create two different divisions now. And we're going to have DPEP, which is Disney Parks, Experience and Products, and we're going to have DMED, which is Disney Media, Entertainment, Distribution. And he was going to have Kareem Daniel, who was Chapek's right-hand man, basically oversee the budgets for these studios. So there was this extra tier of, Feige wasn't in charge of a Marvel budget, and Lucasfilm wasn't in charge. And so it was an overseer of everything. And this guy was basically controlling the content direction of the company. And it basically cut the legs from underneath the different divisions in the studios. And that was a massive negative, I think, for the creative direction of the company. And it meant that no matter what was made at these studios, a project couldn't be made from start to finish. This project is definitely going to theaters. This project is definitely going to Disney Plus. Instead, it set up a strategy of saying, well, you make something, and then we'll decide where to put it later on. And when you do that, you aren't honing it. Because, like, let's say a movie, for instance, like Avengers Endgame. There were moments in that movie where you need to pace it differently for a cinema audience versus a Disney Plus audience, And so things like that really do matter to the creative direction of a company, but it also matters to the creatives to be able to feel like their content's going to be viewed by a certain audience. Like, if I was creating videos and I didn't know whether it was going to go up on Twitter or Instagram or YouTube, I would be a bit, shaky in what kind of content I was going to make. But I know my audience on YouTube, so I cater to that audience on YouTube. I know how to make a YouTube video. God, there's so many comments here. I'm sorry. I hope the discussion and the chat that you're all having there is a good chat. I'm sorry I can't be more active in it. There's just so many comments coming in. But basically, the news coming out today is I would like... So we've got a couple of contenders for the next CEO of the Walt Disney Company after Bob Iger steadies the ship. But I would like Peter Rice. I think he would be a fantastic one. I think Tom Staggs, if he would be interested, would be great. But he's been out of the company for quite a few years now, and the relationship with Iger wasn't the best when they left. And then the last decision would have been Kevin Mayer, if he would be open to coming back. Another one who I'll throw out there is Catherine Powell. I would like to see the first female CEO of a Walt Disney Company in Catherine Powell. I think she would be a fantastic CEO. I don't think she would want it now. She's been out of the company for a couple of years. But it would be interesting to see, even if they go around talking to different execs at technology companies. Because, for an example, back in 2016, when Tom Staggs was left the company, and this is when everything happened, basically. Tom Staggs was meant to be the next CEO of Walt Disney Company. Chapek, Iger decided to stay on for a couple more years, and Staggs left. And so then the board of directors at Disney started to look around for a different CEO contender. And by doing so, they even considered people like Sheryl Sandberg of Facebook to be CEO, and Meg Whitman, and people like that were in, and I think Marissa Mayer may have been who was the CEO of Yahoo, and they were looking at technology companies for potential CEOs, because obviously Disney was moving in a very technological direction, and they still are. So it's going to be very interesting to see where this goes, but obviously I will be covering it all here on DSNY Newscast. I'm very excited about the direction of the Walt Disney Company now. It's going to be a fascinating time to watch Disney over the next 2 years get back to where they need to be, basically, which is a market-leading company, not just a market-leading company, an industry-leading company, because that's what they are. Disney's the most creative company in the world. Say what you want, I think Apple's the most technologically, innovative company in terms of making products which are consumer-friendly and simple to use and be able to change the world like they have with the iPhone. But I think that Disney is the most creative company in the entire world. The amount of creative people they've got working at Disney, and it stands for quality, it stands for service, it stands for outstanding service. The service that the cast members provide in the parks, the way that the attractions are maintained. We need to get back to that level. And I feel like we are going to be heading in that direction now. If there's someone saying there, informative live stream. Yeah. Basically, this is just a lot of the thoughts which I've had for the last 2 years, which have been bottled up inside. But let me just have a quick drink, and then it's not sponsored by Yeti, but I can have a quick drink there. But yeah, you can probably tell I rushed to do this live stream. But yeah, so the other things I want to talk about, by the way, leave some comments in and help steer the direction of the live stream here. But, when it comes to the parks and resorts, for an example, we need to see some investment in the parks and resorts now. We need to see some announcements, almost like the D23 Expo this year was a real lackluster affair. they basically announced nothing. And it will be very interesting to see who stays in which positions. I think Josh D'Amaro probably will stay in the position of Disney Parks Experience and Products Chairman. I think he actually had his, freedom to lead that division clipped quite a lot by Chapek over the past 2 years. Chapek in an interview in October even said, "Oh well, I was Parks Chairman for 7 years, and he was only Parks Chairman for 5 years." But for him to be thinking in his head that he was Parks Chairman for 7 years, maybe that was indicative of the fact that he was still very heavily involved in the Parks division, from 2015 to 2022 this year, rather than walking away from the Parks division in 2020. So it'll be interesting to see that, whether D'Amaro stays in his position. I imagine he will. I don't imagine Iger will come in and immediately change the deck of executives immediately, but because he'll want to provide some stability. But it will be interesting to see how he goes about for the rest of this year and over the next 2 years, shaping the company differently, because he's got his work cut out for him. If we talk about the insider business politics of this whole thing, the Hollywood Reporter and Variety and Deadline and people like that have all released articles in the past 2 years who have basically explained the fraught relationship that developed between Chapek and Iger. And when Iger stepped down and the pandemic hit and it was so difficult, Iger basically said, "I'm willing to step back up and be very active be extremely active in a day-to-day role to try and help steer the ship." And Chapek saw that as, "Oh, you're trying to take over," and he should have welcomed the help because he could have really done with it during that time. And so Iger took a back seat, and he basically took a back seat for the rest of his 2 years because Chapek wouldn't allow him to help out, basically. Now, I do think that the way that Iger left in 2020, in February 2020, it was... I've said this publicly before, but I do think that he should have stayed at the time. I think with knowing what we know in January and February and the pandemic, and knowing how monumental a pandemic was and how scary it all was at the time, I feel like Iger should have just stayed on as CEO at the time. I know the reason why he probably didn't want to, because he just launched Disney Plus and he wanted that to be the crowning achievement of his career. And he went off to write his book, Ride of a Lifetime and things like that, which is a great book, by the way. It gives you a real insight to the relationship between Chapek and Iger before the falling out. But he wanted Disney Plus, the launch of Disney Plus, this huge thing, the many acquisitions that folded into this massive streaming service, to be his crowning achievement, which, from an ego standpoint, I understand. He wanted to exit out on a high. He was 70 years old, and I don't blame the guy. But likewise, if he would have stayed on as CEO, it could have provided him the opportunity to say, "Hey, not only did I do that, but I also saved the Walt Disney Company." And there's been articles that come out this past year saying that Iger's even said that the appointment of Chapek as his successor was his greatest regret as Disney CEO, and that is like one of the biggest insults that you could possibly make. It's a polite insult. It's not calling someone a name, but it should not be understated how big of a statement that is. And basically, if he regretted it that much, I'm so glad that he came back to right the wrong. Because if anyone's going to do it, it should be Iger. And I actually was saying recently to somebody that the person who I would like to see come back as CEO, and I thought, after watching Bob Iger's interview at what was it? Not All Things D. What's it called? Recode, the Recode conference, which was like beginning of October or so. That he did this interview, and I'll leave some links down below maybe on this. But he did an interview, and he sounded like a man who wasn't happy with the way he left, and he still had something left to give the company. And I really felt like he wanted to come back and right the wrong, and I'm glad that he did, because I got the sense from that interview that he did at the Recode conference. But it will be very critical who they pick next after Iger as CEO, and how trained they are to lead the company, because Disney overall has a direction at the moment which is, just maximizing profits, minimizing losses, and that's it. And that's a very short-term game to be playing. You need long-term vision. And even they mentioned that in the earnings call, not the earnings call, the statement here about how they needed longer-term vision. They need longer-term growth. Let me go back up here. Such a pivotal there you go. It says in a period of industry transformation, Bob Iger was uniquely situated to lead the company through this pivotal period. And when we're talking about that transformative period, not only are we seeing a transformation of how people consume media in terms of streaming services, but the next era, and that is I don't think it's going to be the metaverse. I think it's going to be AR, augmented reality, and how we can integrate more technology with the reality that we all live for a amalgamation of creative content. So therefore, with AR, and Apple may potentially releasing in the next couple of years their AR glasses, and they can add augmented levels to the real world, I think that's a more natural integration of content within our lives like that. The other interesting thing is Bob Iger has a very close relationship with Apple. And I know there's been talk recently, I don't think this is going to happen, but I know there's been talk recently once again with the low stock price that Disney's in right now and the huge debt burden that they have, that potentially Apple may consider the purchase. And the fact that Iger has now come back for 2 years as CEO, would he be willing to allow a merger between Disney and Apple? Because Apple needs the content, they need the creative content, and if they manage to basically absorb the Disney debt and then get to use all of get to use the Disney brand to promote their products with creative content, that could be a winning partnership, I believe, because Apple's got so much cash in hand that it would give Apple an instant trump card, basically an instant unbeatable card within the media landscape. It would allow Apple to then be one of the biggest players within the Hollywood and media industry. And I seriously think that if they did merge the two, it would be a very positive outcome. Because in The Ride of a Lifetime book, which Iger wrote, he even said if Steve Jobs had stayed alive, if Steve Jobs hadn't died, let's just say that. I'm not on TikTok, I don't have to say unalived. But if Steve Jobs hadn't have died in 2011, he would have very much seen it likely that Apple would have merged with Disney. And now that Disney's in this position, maybe we could see that happen. I don't think we'll see any news of that for a while, but I don't think that would be a terrible thing in the long run for the long-term success of the Disney company. But we'll not go too far down that, because that is very heavy rumor mill. But with rumors, often there's smoke behind the fire, and there were articles earlier this year that said that industry leaders, Hollywood industry insiders, they asked them, what are your big predictions for 2022? And one of them said, which was actually one which was mentioned quite a few times, I expect Bob Iger to be back as CEO of the Disney Company by the end of 2022. And lo and behold, it's November 20th, and Bob Iger is back as CEO of the Walt Disney Company. So we'll see. We'll see how things play out. But this has been a very quick breaking news live stream. Hopefully I've, provided some insight into the situation. I will probably be bringing out a more in-depth deep dive into not only Chapek and the demise of Chapek, because now that he's left, we can really talk about his tenure at the company and all the mistakes he made. But we can also talk about where the future goes with Iger and how we're going to steady the ship. And when I say we, I mean we talk about steadying the ship. And how we're going to. Someone said there your video from a while ago has aged very well. Yeah, no, the video from a couple of hours ago has aged like milk. I agree with that. But I am going to leave it up. I'm probably going to put a thing at the top of the description box saying this video is, 5 hours after it was released, Bob Chapek announced that he was standing down as CEO. But the fact that Chapek has left this suddenly on a Sunday night of all things, this has been ugly. We won't hear this full story for a week or so until it leaks out to the Hollywood press. But I imagine this was a... have you ever seen the movie Jobs with Ashton Kutcher in it? And they show how Steve Jobs was ousted from Apple. I feel like it would have been one of those scenarios where it would have been a 9 p.m. Board of directors meeting, and Chapek would have been stood there, and he basically was ousted. There was a vote. And I think this wasn't, or maybe they were going to say, we're going to have a vote in you, and he just resigned because of that. We won't know the full story for a little while, but this is fascinating. This is as fascinating as it gets in terms of Disney business practice, in terms of the behind the scenes of Disney executive business. This is like, all sorts of gossip will go on about it, but we'll be very interested to see how this turns out. So basically, that's someone's saying here, I doubt Iger will run for president now. Yeah, I don't think he'll run for president. He's kind of given up on his aspirations of that. I think he said that in interviews before, that he has no interest in running for president or anything like that. But yeah. Also, the other thing I wanted to very quickly mention is, how is this going to affect the Lake Nona move? Because Imagineering's been cut back so much now with layoffs and things like that. I mean, Chapek announced a hiring freeze as of a week ago, and that was, a hiring freeze. All of a sudden, a strategic hiring freeze in certain areas. Be interesting to see what happens with that with Iger now. We don't know, but we'll start finding out. And it'll also be interesting to see what happens with Imagineering in terms of any old hands coming back into Imagineering, like Joe Rohde. Would he be tempted to come back into Imagineering if he was given more of a emeritus kind of position, if he was given more of a leadership, like a mentorship of the younger generation role? I could see maybe Tony Baxter doing the same, because this is what we need now. We need institutional knowledge passed down for the next generation. I love this one here. Cameron says, your post from 5 hours ago, you have insider information. I didn't have any insider information whatsoever on this news. Otherwise, I would have waited 5 hours. No, and this is it's as shocking to me as it is to everyone else. I wouldn't have wanted to post a video and have it be defunct within 5 hours. Which, by the way, Defunctland, just a quick plug here, Defunctland's released a brand new video over on their channel, all about the Disney Channel. Just want to put a quick plug in for them, because Kevin over there does a fantastic job, and I'm a big fan of his. So, go and check out the latest Defunctland, and whilst you're at it, also watch the defunct video that I made 5 hours ago. So it'll be very interesting times ahead. I think we've all got our wish, which is for Chapek to leave. He's gone, Iger's back, and for the next 2 years, it's going to be a fascinating time to watch for Walt Disney Company. And you can do it all here on DSNY Newscast, because I'll be covering it all as it develops, and I'll be bringing you more information about all of this later on. But for now, I think it's about time that we end this live stream. It's 11:15 at night here. And so, with that being said, one last time, gotta say it because it doesn't feel like it's real yet. It still hasn't really sunk in. Chapek is gone as Disney CEO, and Iger is back as Disney CEO for 2 years. Just let that sink in, okay? And with that being said, I've been Jack, you've been you, and I'll see you real soon.